You should read Nine Notches because it's going to introduce you to people that I feel were often left out of our textbooks. Nine Notches is going to take you into the harsh reality of slavery, as well as the closeness that existed in the French Quarter, in the Vieux Carre district. Beatrice lived with the person who owned her, and a lot of those the enslaved people lived with the people who owned them, not in an outhouse type situation, but if you go to the French quarters and you ever see those little half homes in the back of the main building, that's where they lived. And I had the honor of filming and shooting for the production of Nine Notches in an actual slave quarters, and it's many of the photos that you see that's on the website. You can visit the website. Many of those photos were taken in actual slave quarters, and that's the beauty of New Orleans, is that you can actually stand where the person stood. When I described this scene in a book where the bell rings and Beatrice walks across the balcony, we were able to stand on that actual balcony, and that within itself is priceless. So you should read the story. You should read the story to get the rest of the story. The fact that I love this city and I grew up in this city, there's so much that was passed down to me that I wanted to show the role that women played during this whole time period. That you can have a slave woman, right, an enslaved woman, and she still had a position of power that she was able to carve out for herself. You can have a wife during this time when women had no rights, and she was still able to carve out a position of power for herself. And it's studying women who took the little bit that they had at the time and used it and implemented those things into their daily survival, such as you may have someone who was a cook, and the fact that she was an enslaved woman who was a cook, she figured out how to use her ingredients to secure freedom. You may have another woman that she was in her complexion very fair, and she figured out a way how to use her complexion to free or give her children access to freedom. So Nine Notches is really, it's about the rise of the woman during the transatlantic slave trade. And it's a story that I had to tell because that whole rise is something that's uniquely New Orleans, or as we say here, naturally New Orleans. And it's a story that I hope you enjoy. Where did the story come from? I would say Nine Notches came from the women that I have been blessed to know, women that I consider historians, such as Sarah Johnson, right, from Lower St. Bernard Parish, Sebastopol. Melvina Bailey, also from St. Bernard Parish. My grandmother, who was originally from Amite, Louisiana, and yet moved to New Orleans. When you can tap into those stories, and that's what I was able to do with Nine Notches, is to pull from that vault of those stories and tell, interesting aspects of this horrible period in time where one person was able to be sold and owned and deeded off and inherited and placed up for collateral. I was able to study this period in a real way and have people point me in the right direction where I can learn and understand more what really happened in a really authentic way. Nine Notches is two stories that intersect at some point, where you have a modern day version where you have two friends who are taking on a dissertation and they're studying New Orleans families, and they encounter some of these unique aspects of slavery that no one knew about, because that's what it was like for me. To write this book, I spent a considerable amount of time in the archives and just really digging down and looking for these little nuggets that, things that wasn't written or shown in a movie, 12 Years a Slave. And what people need to understand about New Orleans is that, yes, it's this amazing city right now, but even during slavery, this city was unbelievable. And the fact that, the slaves understood that they could very easily secure their freedom based on their appearance. So when you have, one of the biggest crimes that I found interesting from the archives were slaves who would steal the clothes off the lines from the French colonizers, right? They would steal their clothes. When the wash lady put them up and hung them up to dry, some of them would take their clothes, slide into those clothes, and then declare themselves free because secretly they had also developed the correct vernacular to be able to communicate as a freed man. And this actually happened. You had slaves who would go into bars in New Orleans. The things that that wasn't thought of. But New Orleans slavery was different. And I learned a lot of that just from digging deep in research on this. And that's what I brought to this story. So it's one that I feel had to be written, and it's one that I'm hoping that will stand the test of time.